The automatic glass door slid open with a soft hiss, letting a wave of noise from the busy Los Angeles street before sealing it shut again. The air inside the waiting room was cool and smelled faintly of antiseptic wipes and old coffee. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the place was packed. Every plastic chair was occupied by someone holding a clipboard, cradling a broken arm, or staring blankly at a muted television mounted in the corner. Victoria stepped through the doors, her heels clicking sharply against the polished linoleum floor. She was a woman who commanded attention, not because she wanted it, but because she clearly wasn't used to being ignored. She wore a tailored blazer that probably cost more than most of the people in the room made in a month, and she carried a leather bag that hung perfectly from the crook of her arm. Her hair was sleek, her makeup was precise, but her eyes were darting around the room with clear irritation. She pressed her phone to her ear, her voice raised just enough to turn heads. "I don't care about the delay, Kevin. Fix it. I'm not paying you to make excuses," she snapped, pacing a small circle near the entrance. People glanced up at her, a mother with a sleeping toddler, an elderly man holding a cup of water, and then quickly looked away, not wanting to be on the receiving end of her frustration. Victoria ended the call with a dramatic tap of her finger and sighed, checking the time on her gold watch. She was only here because her aunt had fallen and needed a ride home, a task that fell to her since no one else in the family was available. She resented every second she spent in this building. She had meetings to get to, deals to close, and the atmosphere of the hospital was dragging her energy down. Her feet were aching. The shoes were beautiful, but they weren't made for standing around on hard floors. She scanned the room, looking for a place to sit. The rows of blue vinyl chairs were jammed together. The only empty spot was a single, slightly more cushioned chair near the reception desk. It looked like it was meant for a doctor or a VIP, but right now, it was empty. Victoria began to walk toward it, weaving through the crowd. As she got closer, she frowned. Draped over the back of the empty chair was a worn-out denim jacket. It was faded, frayed at the cuffs, and looked like it had seen better days. Sitting on the seat itself was a simple paper coffee cup with the lid popped off. Standing right next to the chair, looking down at a folded paper map in his hands, was a man. He was dressed in layers of mismatched clothes, a gray hoodie under a dark flannel shirt, worn-out boots, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped forward as if he was carrying the weight of the world on his back. He didn't look like a doctor. He didn't even look like he belonged in the clean, bright waiting area of a private clinic. To Victoria, he looked like someone who had walked in off the street to get out of the heat. She stopped in front of him, waiting for him to move or to claim his jacket. He didn't seem to notice her. He was too busy tracing a line on the map with his finger, murmuring something quietly to himself. He looked disheveled, unimportant, just another person slowing down her day. Victoria looked around. No one else was moving. The chair was calling to her. She felt a surge of entitlement rise in her chest. Why should she stand in her expensive heels while this chair was being saved by a jacket? It was a public hospital, technically, and she had business here. Without saying a word, she reached out. She pinched the collar of the denim jacket between her thumb and forefinger, lifting it as if it were a dirty rag. She held it away from her body, her nose wrinkling slightly. Then she tossed the jacket onto the small side table next to the chair. Next, she picked up the coffee cup and placed it on top of the jacket. The man next to her shifted his weight. He looked up, seemingly surprised by the movement. It was Keanu Reeves, though in his hat and tired clothes, he blended in completely. He had the map in one hand and a small bottle of water in the other. He looked at the chair, now empty, and then up at Victoria. Victoria didn't look at him. She simply sat down. She let out a long, exaggerated breath as her back hit the cushion, smoothing her skirt under her legs. She pulled her phone out her bag, acting as if she had done nothing wrong. "Excuse me," a quiet voice said beside her. Victoria ignored it, typing a message on her screen. She assumed he was going to ask for money or complain. She wasn't in the mood for either. Miss?" The voice came again. It was deep but gentle, not aggressive, just confused. Victoria finally turned her head, looking up at him with a cold stare. "Yes? Can I help you?" The man, Keanu, gestured vaguely toward the jacket on the table. He didn't look angry. He actually looked a little embarrassed. I was actually sitting there. I just stepped away to look at the directory. He paused, his eyes flicking to the crowded room. I'm waiting for... I have an appointment soon. Victoria raised an eyebrow. She looked him up and down, taking in the scuffed boots and the old cap. Well, you aren't sitting there now, she said, her voice sharp. You left your things, but you left a seat. In this city, if you walk away from a seat, you lose it. That's how it works. She turned back to her phone, dismissing him. I'm very busy. I don't have time to argue about a chair. There was a moment of silence. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to get louder. People nearby were watching now, sensing the tension. A few disapproving glances were shot in Victoria's direction, but she didn't care. She had the seat. She had won. That was what mattered to her. Keanu stood there for a second longer. He looked at the chair, then at the map in his hand, and finally at the floor. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't sigh in frustration. He didn't raise his voice to tell her who he was or that he had as much right to be there as she did. Instead, a small, sad smile touched his lips. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they are used to things not going their way, but they refuse to let it make them bitter. Okay, he said softly. You're right. My mistake. He reached out and carefully picked up his denim jacket from the table. He treated it with care, folding it over his arm. He picked up the coffee cup, checking to make sure it hadn't spilled. Then he stepped back, creating space between them. I hope your day gets better, he murmured, almost too quietly to hear. He turned away from the comfortable chair, away from the woman who had refused to meet his gaze, and walked toward the far end of the room. It was the only space left, a narrow strip of wall near the large glass windows that looked out over the parking lot. There was no seat there, just a patch of bare floor. Victoria watched him go out of the corner of her eye. She felt a slight pang of something, annoyance that he had spoken to her. Perhaps. She adjusted her blazer and crossed her legs, trying to get comfortable. She told herself she had done the right thing. She was important. She was in a hurry. He was just a guy standing around. As she opened her email app, she saw the man lean his back against the cold wall. He slid down slowly until he was sitting on the floor, his legs stretched out in front of him, his back resting against the window. He took a sip of his coffee and opened his map again, trying to find his way in a place that felt overwhelming. Victoria looked away, focusing on her screen, pushing the interaction out of her mind. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he was there. She just knew she had a seat, and for now, that was all that mattered to her. But the air in the room seemed a little heavier now, and the silence felt a little less comfortable. The plastic chair was softer than it looked, and Victoria let her body sink into it, releasing a sigh that she had been holding in since she parked her car. She shifted her weight, getting comfortable, and crossed one leg over the other. The expensive fabric of her pants slid smoothly against the vinyl. In her mind, this was exactly where she belonged. She had worked hard for her life, for the tailored clothes and the assistant who answered her calls, and waiting in a crowded hospital room was an inconvenience she shouldn't have to deal with. She tapped her phone screen again, bringing up her email. The blue light reflected in her eyes as she scanned through the messages, her brow furrowing. There was a problem with a shipment in New York. She immediately started typing a response, her fingers flying across the glass. Fix this now, she typed, the words sharp and demanding. She didn't add a please. She didn't have time for it. A few feet away, sitting on the hard floor, the man in the cap was trying to find a comfortable position. It wasn't easy. The floor was tiled, unforgiving and cold, even through his denim jeans. He shifted his legs, stretching them out, then pulling them back in when a nurse hurried past with a clipboard. He pressed his back against the wall, which was vibrating slightly from a hum of the building's air system. He looked small compared to the bustling activity around him, like a rock sitting in a stream while the water rushed by. Victoria glanced at him over the top of her phone. He was looking at his map again, turning it sideways, his lips moving slightly as he read the street names. He didn't look like he was working. He didn't have a laptop or a briefcase, or even a smartwatch. He just had that worn jacket and a cup of coffee. Probably waiting for the free clinic to open, she thought to herself, a judgment forming instantly in her mind. She saw the scuff marks on his boots and the way his shoulders slumped. To her, He was just another person who hadn't made the right choices in life. Someone who didn't understand the value of time. Someone who was content to sit on the floor while people like her ran the world. She turned her attention back to her phone, her voice rising unconsciously as she answered another call. Listen to me. The budget is already cut. We can't go over. I don't care what the vendors say. Tell them to find a way. People in the nearby chairs turned to look at her. An older man in a wheelchair frowned, shaking his head slowly. Victoria noticed the looks, but ignored them. She didn't care what they thought. They were strangers. They were part of the background noise of her day. She put a hand over her other ear to block out the sound of a child crying a few rows down, focusing entirely on her deal. The man on the floor didn't look up. He didn't seem to notice her loud voice or the annoyance radiating off her. He was busy folding the map. He took his time, creasing the paper carefully along the line so it wouldn't tear. When he was done, he tucked it into his jacket pocket. Then he took a sip of his coffee. He held the cup with both hands, as if warming them. A janitor pushing a large yellow mop bucket came down the aisle. The wheels squeaked loudly against the floor. As the janitor approached the area where Victoria was sitting, he paused. He needed to mop the floor near her feet. Victoria saw the wet floor sign and the mop coming toward her new shoes. She instantly pulled her feet up, tucking them under the chair, and glared at the janitor. "Excuse me," she snapped. "Could you wait? I'm on a call." The janitor, a middle-aged man with a tired face, nodded respectfully and stepped back, waiting for her to finish. He stood there awkwardly, holding the mop handle, while Victoria continued her conversation for another minute. She was talking about stock options, something the janitor likely knew nothing about. She treated him like he was a piece of furniture that was in the way. When she finally ended the call, she waved her hand dismissively at the man. "Go ahead," she said. The janitor nodded again and began to mop the floor around her shoes. He worked quickly, trying to stay out of her space. Victoria watched him, feeling a sense of satisfaction. She liked that things moved for her. She liked that people stopped when she said stop. It was how the world was supposed to work. Then she looked at the man sitting on the wall. The janitor's mop was heading toward his boots next. The man on the floor noticed. He didn't wait to be asked. He immediately pulled his legs in tight against his chest, lifting his feet completely off the ground so the janitor could clean the entire floor beneath him. He smiled at the janitor, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod of thanks for the work the man was doing. The janitor smiled back, his shoulders relaxing. "Thank you, sir," the janitor whispered. "Don't mention it." The man in the cap whispered back. Victoria watched this exchange with a sneer. She couldn't understand it. Why would he move so fast? Why was he so polite to someone mopping the floor? It made no sense to her. In her world, you only moved for important people. You only respected those who could help you get ahead. He's probably just used to being stepped on, she told herself. She checked her watch again. Where was her aunt? This was taking forever. The man on the floor shifted again, wincing slightly as he tried to find a spot on the wall that didn't hurt his back. He took a small bottle of water from his pocket and took a drink. He looked down the hallway toward the elevators, his eyes searching for someone. Victoria pulled a compact mirror out of her bag. She checked her lipstick. It was a perfect shade of red. She powdered her nose, ignoring the world around her. She felt a sudden itch of boredom. She had answered her emails, yelled at her team, and checked her stocks. She needed something to distract her. She looked around the room. There was a poster on the wall about flu shots. There was a fish tank in the corner with a few sluggish fish. And there was a man on the floor. He was the only interesting thing in the room, mostly because he seemed so out of place. She stared at him, really staring, trying to figure him out. He looked familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. Maybe he was an actor? One of those character actors who played thugs or janitors in movies. He had that kind of face, rough but interesting. But if he was an actor, why was he sitting on the floor? Why didn't he have an assistant? Just a nobody, she decided, closing her mirror with a snap. Probably a drifter. She stood up, needing to stretch her legs. As she stood, she towered over him. He didn't look up. He was tying the lace of his boot. She stepped over his outstretched leg without looking down, barely missing his knee with her heel. She walked toward the large glass windows that looked out over the city. Outside, the traffic was moving smoothly. The sun was shining on the skyscrapers. It was a beautiful day, and she was stuck inside. She felt a surge of anger at her situation again. She hated feeling trapped. She hated being around sick people. It reminded her of things she preferred to forget: mortality, weakness, the fragility of life. She turned her back on the window and leaned against the sill, crossing her arms. She looked back at the empty chair she had claimed. It looked good. It was her chair. She had won that small battle. The man on the floor was still there. He hadn't moved. He was just waiting, patient and quiet. He seemed to be in his own world, unaffected by the rush, the noise, or the cold floor. There was a strange calmness about him that Victoria found annoying. How could he be so calm when he had nothing? How could he sit there without complaining? She didn't realize it, but she was waiting for him to leave. She wanted him to get up and walk out, so she could feel even more vindicated. She wanted to see his back disappear through the doors, so she could forget she ever took his seat. But he didn't leave. He just took another sip of coffee and checked the hallway doors again, waiting for his turn, just like everyone else in the room, except he was doing it without a chair and without a single complaint. The minutes dragged on, turning into what felt like hours. The clock on the wall seemed to move slower than anywhere else in the city. Victoria was still standing by the window, though she had shifted her weight from one foot to the other a dozen times. Her heels were starting to pinch her toes again, a sharp reminder that fashion wasn't always comfortable. She checked her phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes. No new messages. Her aunt was apparently taking forever in the examination room. She let out a huff of air, blowing a stray hair away from her face. She looked back at the chair she had claimed. It was still sitting there, empty and pristine, with her leather bag resting on it like a guard dog. She felt a small spark of victory every time she looked at it. It was her territory in a chaotic world. Near the reception desk, the noise level picked up. A woman was arguing loudly with the receptionist about an insurance copay. The voice was shrill, cutting through the low hum of conversation. Victoria rolled her eyes. She hated drama. She hated messy public displays of emotion. It was so low class. Then, a different sound broke through the noise. It was a soft, rhythmic squeaking sound. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Victoria turned to look. Coming down the long hallway was a young boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. He was wearing a hospital gown that was slightly too big for him, the sleeves hanging past his hands, and loose pajama pants. He was pushing a tall metal pole with wheels and 4-stand that had a clear bag of fluid hanging from it. The boy looked pale and tired, his eyes wide and a little glassy. He moved slowly, carefully maneuvering the pole around the chairs. He looked fragile, like a strong wind might knock him over. A few steps behind him was a woman who was clearly his mother. She was on a phone call, her face stressed, one hand holding a stack of papers. She wasn't looking at the boy. She was nodding at whoever was on the other end of the line, distracted by the logistics of sickness, leaving her son to navigate the waiting room on his own. Victoria watched the boy approach. She hoped he wouldn't come near her. She didn't want to move her bag again, and she didn't want to risk him tripping over her expensive shoes. She tightened her arms across her chest, creating a barrier. The boy didn't look at Victoria. He seemed to be in his own world, focused on keeping the 4-pole from rolling over anyone's feet. He kept walking until he reached the open area near the wall, the exact spot where the man in the cap was sitting. The man looked up. He saw the boy immediately. He didn't look annoyed that his space was being invaded. He didn't try to make himself smaller. Instead, he stopped what he was doing. He had been twisting a plastic water bottle cap in his hands, but he set it down on the floor beside him. The boy stopped, too. He stood a few feet away, looking at the man sitting on the ground. The boy looked hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should keep walking or stop. Then, the boy's eyes narrowed. He looked closer at the man's face, which was partially shadowed by the brim of the cap. The boy's mouth opened slightly. He tilted his head. He looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle. The man in the cap noticed the staring. He didn't turn away or pull his hat down further to hide. He simply looked back, his face open and calm. He smiled just a little bit. It was a smile that didn't demand anything back. "Hey there," the man said. His voice was low, quiet enough that it didn't carry to the rest of the room. It was a gentle sound, like a parent reading a bedtime story. The boy stepped a little closer. He let go of the floor stand, leaving it rolling slightly to the side. "I know you," the boy whispered. His voice was raspy. The man shook his head slightly, acting shy. "I don't think so. I think you might be mistaking me for someone else. I'm just a guy waiting for a doctor." The boy took another step. He wasn't buying it. He looked back at his mother to make sure she wasn't watching. Then he looked at the man with intense focus. "You're the guy from the movie," the boy said, his eyes getting brighter. "The one with the dog." The man chuckled softly. He reached up and adjusted his cap. "Yeah, I have a dog." "And you fight the bad guys." The boy continued, gaining confidence. "You jump off buildings." "Only in the movies," the man said. "In real life, I just sit on floors and drink coffee." Victoria was watching this now. She couldn't help it. She was curious. Why would a famous movie star be sitting on the floor of a hospital waiting room? And why was he talking to this random kid like they were old friends? She squinted, trying to see his face better. He looked so ordinary. His clothes were old. His posture was relaxed. He didn't have an entourage. He didn't have a camera crew. "Does it hurt?" the boy asked suddenly, pointing to the man's leg. The man looked down. "No, I'm just resting. What about you? Are you okay?" The boy shrugged. He looked down at his own arm, where a needle was taped under a clear dressing. "It's boring, and the medicine makes my tummy feel weird." The man nodded seriously. He didn't treat the boy like a child. He didn't say, "Oh, you're so brave," or "It will be okay." He just treated him like a person. "That sounds tough," the man said. "Boredom is the worst part. Do you like superheroes?" The boy's face lit up. "Yes, I like the fast ones." "Me too," the man said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I knew a guy once who could run so fast he could run on water. Do you think that's real?" The boy giggled. It was a sweet sound, cutting through the gloomy atmosphere of the hospital. "No, that's silly. Water is wet. You would splash." "You're right," the man laughed. "You're smart. You would make a better superhero than me. You figured out the water problem." For the next few minutes, the waiting room seemed to fade away for the two of them. The man on the floor and the boy with the 4 poles sat in their own bubble. The man told a story about a dog he knew who chased a squirrel up a tree and got stuck. He acted out the part of the dog, barking softly and waving his hands, making the boy laugh until his stomach hurt. The boy's fear, the sterile smell of the hospital, the confusion of being sick, it all seemed to melt away. In that moment, he wasn't a sick kid in a gown. He was just a kid talking to a friend. Victoria watched, feeling a strange tightness in her chest. She looked at the man. He was sitting on the cold, hard floor, ignoring his own comfort, completely focused on making the stranger's son feel better. He wasn't checking his watch. He wasn't worried about his clothes getting dirty. He was just there. She looked at herself. She was standing by the window, holding onto her phone like a shield, annoyed at the world. She had a chair, a comfortable, soft chair, and she was miserable. This man had nothing but the floor, yet he was bringing joy to someone else. The nurse came out from the double doors near the desk. "Sam," she called out, looking at a clipboard. The boy's head snapped up. The spell broke. He looked at the man. "I have to go." "Go get him, Sam," the man said, giving him a thumbs up. "Don't let them give you the green medicine. Ask for the red one. It tastes better." "Okay," Sam said, grabbing his 4-pole. He paused for a second. "Thanks, mister." "Anytime," the man said. Sam ran. Well, as fast as he could with the pole, toward his mother, who was just getting off the phone. He was smiling. The fear was gone from his eyes. Victoria watched the man lean back against the wall. He picked up his water bottle and took a sip. He looked tired again, the energy he used for the boy fading away now that the interaction was over. He looked down at his hands. Then the nurse walked over to the man. Victoria held her breath. She leaned in closer, pretending to look for something in her bag, but her ears were wide open. "Mr. Reeves?" the nurse said softly. "We're ready for you now. The doctor is waiting for you in room 302. The man on the floor froze. He didn't stand up right away. He looked at the floor, and for a second, his shoulders slumped even lower. He looked incredibly sad. It was a look of heavy, deep exhaustion that went beyond just being tired. He took a deep breath, blowing it out slowly. Then he picked up his worn jacket. He pushed himself up off the floor, his joints cracking slightly. "Room 302, he repeated quietly. "Okay, I'm coming." He turned to walk down the hallway, but before he did, he glanced back at the empty spot where the little boy had been standing. He gave a tiny, satisfied nod. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing behind the frosted glass doors that led to the treatment rooms. Victoria stood there, her mouth slightly open. Mr. Reeves. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. She looked at the spot on the floor where he had been sitting. The imprint of his jeans was still on the tile. The empty chair she was guarding sat right in front of her. Suddenly, the chair didn't look like a prize. It looked like a prop. It looked empty. A cold chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She looked at her phone, then at the door where he had vanished. She realized she had just made a terrible mistake, and there was no way to take it back. The white doors clicked shut with a heavy, final sound. The latch caught, and the man in the cap was gone. He had disappeared into the maze of the hospital, taking his quiet dignity with him. The waiting room seemed to hold its breath for a second, and then the noise rushed back in, the television, the chatter, the coughing, but it all sounded different to Victoria now. It sounded sharper, louder, and intrusive. She stood frozen by the window, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, but the screen was dark. She wasn't looking at it. She was staring at the blank space where the man had just been standing. Her heart was beating a strange, uneven rhythm. Asterisk, thump, thump. Pause. Thump, thump. Asterisk. Mr. Reeves. The name echoed in her mind, bouncing off the walls of her skull. She knew that face. She had seen it on billboards towering over Times Square. She had seen it on movie posters in the subway. She had watched him on her big-screen television at home, laughing at his jokes, cheering for his victories. It was Keanu Reeves, the actor, the star. She looked down at the empty spot on the floor where he had been sitting. There was a faint scuff mark on the white tile, perhaps from his boot. Then she looked at the chair she had been guarding so fiercely. It was just a blue vinyl chair with a small rip in the armrest. 5 minutes ago, it had been a prize. Now it looked like a piece of trash. The heat started in her neck and rose up to her cheeks. It was a burning, prickly sensation, like a rash. She was embarrassed. Actually, she was mortified. She felt her stomach turn over, twisting itself into a tight knot. She had treated him like dirt. She had tossed his jacket onto a table like it was a dirty rag. She had spoken to him with disdain, looking down her nose at him. And why? Because he looked tired? Because he wore old clothes? She remembered the way he had looked at her when she took the seat. He hadn't been angry. He hadn't yelled. He had just looked sad. He had apologized to her. "My mistake," he had said. He had taken the blame for her rudeness. He had sat on the hard, cold floor without complaining, while she sat in comfort, complaining about her life. Victoria felt like she couldn't breathe. The air in the room seemed too thin. She put a hand on the back of the empty chair to steady herself. She thought about the interaction with the little boy, Sam. The man had been kind. He had been gentle. He had made a sick child laugh when he was probably carrying his own heavy burden. Room 302. She knew enough about hospitals to know that room 302 wasn't in the general waiting area. That was the serious ward. That was where people went when things were critical. He wasn't there for a scraped knee. He was there for something life-changing. He was likely visiting someone he loved, or perhaps waiting for news that could break his heart. He was dealing with real pain, real loss. And what was she dealing with? A delayed shipment? A business meeting? She looked around the room. The mother of the little boy was now sitting a few rows away, smiling at her phone, probably looking at a photo of her son. She didn't know it was Keanu Reeves. She just knew a nice man had made her son's day better. Victoria felt a sudden, sharp urge to run. She wanted to pick up her bag, run out the sliding glass doors, and never come back. She wanted to erase the last 20 minutes, but she couldn't. The image of him sitting on the floor, looking up at her with those soft eyes, was burned into her mind. "I am a terrible person," she whispered to herself. The words felt heavy in her mouth. It was the first honest thought she had had all day. She had spent her life thinking that money and success made her important. She thought her expensive suit gave her the right to take up space. But sitting in that plastic chair, she realized how wrong she was. Money bought clothes, but it didn't buy class. Success bought you a seat, but it didn't buy you respect. She looked at the nurse's station. The nurse who had called his name was busy typing on a computer. Victoria took a deep, shaky breath. She couldn't go back in time. She couldn't stand up and offer him the chair now. He was gone, behind those doors, dealing with whatever private hell he was facing. She couldn't apologize to his face. But she had to do something. She had to fix this energy. She had to balance the scales, even just a little bit. She walked toward the desk. Her heels clicked against the floor, but they didn't sound confident anymore. They sounded hesitant, like she wasn't sure she deserved to walk on a clean floor. The nurse looked up, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Victoria cleared her throat. Her voice felt weak and small. "Yes, the boy. The little boy who was just here, with the 4-pole. Sam." The nurse smiled kindly. "Yes, he's a sweetie. He's here for his weekly treatment. His mom is with him now. I won't pay for his lunch today," Victoria said, the words rushing out, "and for the rest of the week. And if there are any other costs for his treatment that the insurance doesn't cover, co-pays, parking, whatever, I want to cover it." The nurse looked surprised. Her eyes widened slightly. She blinked a few times, processing the request. "Oh, that's very generous. Are you a relative?" "No," Victoria said quickly. I'm no one. I just want to help." She pulled a sleek, black credit card from her wallet. It was the same card she used for business dinners and shopping sprees. She held it out, but her hand was shaking slightly. She felt like the card was burning her fingers. It represented a world she was ashamed of right now. "Please," Victoria added, "just make sure he has a good meal. Something better than hospital food. Pizza, maybe. Whatever he wants." The nurse took the card with a nod. "Of course. That will really help his mom. She's been having a hard time affording the parking fees on top of everything else." Victoria nodded, unable to speak. If she tried to say more, she thought she might start crying, and Victoria never cried in public. She signed the receipt without looking at the amount. She didn't care about the money. For the first time in a long time, the money felt like it was actually doing something good. It wasn't buying her status. It was buying a sick kid a pizza. She took her card back and walked away from the desk. She didn't go back to the window. She didn't pull out her phone to check her emails. She walked slowly back to the chair. The chair was still empty. It looked the same as it did 20 minutes ago. Blue vinyl, metal armrests, a small rip, but to Victoria, it looked different. It looked like a monument to her own mistake. It was a symbol of her arrogance. She sat down, but she couldn't get comfortable. She didn't cross her legs. She didn't lean back and relax. She sat on the very edge of the seat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She felt unworthy of the cushion. She felt like she should be sitting on the floor. She thought about Keanu Reeves. She wondered if he was crying in room 302, or if he was being strong for someone else. She hoped he had a chair in there. She hoped someone was being kind to him. The thought of him sitting on a floor in a hospital room made her heart ache. The waiting room was still noisy. The television was playing a loud game show. The air conditioner was humming. But Victoria felt like she was in a bubble of silence. She watched the people around her with new eyes. She saw an elderly man across the aisle struggling to open a water bottle with shaking hands. She saw a young mother looking exhausted, bouncing a baby on her knee. Without thinking, Victoria stood up. She grabbed her bottle of water from her bag. It was unopened and cold. She walked over to the elderly man. "Here," she said, her voice soft. Take this one. It's not open yet." The man looked up, startled. He saw her expensive suit, her perfect hair. He hesitated. "Oh, I couldn't." "Please," Victoria insisted. "I insist." The man took the bottle slowly. "Thank you, miss. That's very kind. God bless you." "You're welcome," Victoria said. And for the first time that day, she meant it. There was no transaction in her voice. She wasn't expecting anything in return. She just wanted to be nice. She turned and walked back to her chair. She still felt the sting of regret, but the burning shame had cooled down a little. She couldn't change the past, and she couldn't take back the way she treated the man on the floor. But she realized something important as she sat there, waiting for her own aunt. She realized that being the richest person in the room didn't mean you were the most important. Sometimes, the most important person was the one sitting on the floor, making a little boy laugh. She checked her watch one last time. Her aunt was taking a long time, but Victoria didn't mind anymore. She sat quietly, humbled, watching the doors, hoping that when the man came out, she would have the courage to stand up and give him her seat. Time moved slowly in the hospital waiting room, like honey dripping from a spoon. The sun outside the large glass windows began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, orange shadows across the floor. The room was less crowded now. The rush of the afternoon had faded into a quieter, more somber evening mood. Victoria sat on the edge of the blue vinyl chair, her posture completely different from when she arrived. Before, she had owned the space, spreading out her belongings and claiming her territory. Now, she sat small, her legs tucked in, her bag resting on the floor by her feet. She was no longer checking her phone every 30 seconds. In fact, her phone was buried deep in her pocket, silenced. She watched the people around her. She saw a teenager helping an old man drink from a fountain. She saw a security guard gently telling a lost visitor where to go. She saw kindness everywhere she looked, things that had been invisible to her. When she first walked in, she wondered how many of these moments she had missed in her life because she was too busy looking at her own reflection. Finally, the double doors near the reception desk swung open. A nurse stepped out holding a clipboard. "Victoria," she called out. Victoria stood up immediately. "That's me. Your aunt is ready to go. We got the discharge papers for you at the front desk." Victoria felt a wave of relief. She could leave this place. She could go back to her office, back to her world of deals and money. But as she walked toward the desk, her eyes kept darting back to the hallway where the actor had disappeared. She wondered if he was still in room 302. She wondered if the news had been good or bad. She hoped, with a strange intensity, that it was good. She signed the papers quickly, her signature neat and precise. The nurse handed her a folder. "Just make sure she takes these pills with food," the nurse instructed. "I will," Victoria said. Her voice was soft. "Thank you for everything you do today. You guys work hard." The nurse looked up, surprised by the compliment. A smile spread across her face. "Thank you. That means a lot." Victoria went to the wheelchair area where her aunt was waiting. Her aunt, a sharp-tongued woman who had never been impressed by much, looked grumpy. "Took you long enough." The aunt grumbled as Victoria helped her stand up. "This place is a dump. The service is terrible." Victoria didn't snap back. She didn't defend herself. She just wrapped her aunt's arm around her waist to support her weight. "I know, Annie. It was a long day. But we're going home now. I'll make you some tea." As they slowly walked toward the exit, moving past the rows of empty chairs, the hallway doors opened again. Victoria stopped walking. She froze. The man in the cap walked out. He didn't look like a movie star. He looked like a man who had been through a war. His shoulders were slumped even lower than before. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed and puffy. He wasn't crying, but he looked like he had been crying recently. He looked completely drained, as if every ounce of energy had been sucked out of him. He was holding a small piece of paper, maybe a prescription or a follow-up appointment note. He stared at it, not really seeing the words. Victoria's aunt tugged on her arm. "Come on, Victoria. I'm tired. Move." "Wait a second," Victoria whispered. She gently let go of her aunt's arm, leaving her leaning against a nearby pillar for support. She took a step toward the man. Her heart was pounding against her ribs. Asterisk thump, thump, thump. Asterisk she felt terrified. She was a woman who negotiated million-dollar contracts without sweating, but the idea of talking to this man made her hands shake. He looked up as she approached. He didn't recognize her at first. Why would he? She was just a rude lady from the chair. But then he saw her face, and a flicker of recognition crossed his tired eyes. "Excuse me," Victoria said. Her voice wavered. She cleared her throat, trying to sound steady. "Mr. Reeves?" He stopped walking. He looked at her, waiting. He didn't smile. He just looked at her with those sad, deep eyes. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Victoria said, the words rushing out. "About earlier. The chair. I was incredibly rude. I didn't know who you were, but it doesn't matter. I shouldn't have treated anyone like that. You were sitting there first, and I took it because I felt entitled to it. I was wrong." The hallway went quiet. A passing doctor slowed down, glancing between them. The air felt heavy. Keanu looked at her. He looked at her expensive shoes, then up to her face. He didn't get angry. He didn't lecture her. He didn't use his fame to make her feel small. Instead, his expression softened. The lines around his mouth relaxed just a fraction. He let out a long, slow breath. "Thank you for saying that," he said quietly. "But please, don't worry about it. It was just a chair. There are much bigger things to worry about in this world." He looked back toward the doors of room 302. His grief was palpable, a heavy cloud hanging over him. Is everything okay?" Victoria asked gently. I hope you got good news." Keanu shook his head slowly. "No," he said simply. "Not today. It was hard." Victoria felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to reach out and hug him, to tell him it would be okay. But she knew she couldn't. She was a stranger. She had no right to his comfort. She had already taken enough from him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again. "Truly." He nodded. "Me too." He adjusted his cap, pulling the brim down slightly to hide his eyes again. He turned to leave, to walk out of the hospital and face the rest of his day. He was going back into the world alone with his sadness. "Wait," Victoria said. He paused, looking back. Victoria walked over to the blue vinyl chair. She picked up her leather bag from the floor, where she had placed it. She looked at the chair, then back at him. "You need to rest," she said firmly but kindly. "You look exhausted. Please take the chair, just for a minute, before you go." She gestured toward the empty seat, the very same seat she had fought him for an hour ago. Keanu looked at the chair. Then he looked at Victoria. For the first time, a tiny, genuine smile touched his lips. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was grateful. It was a smile of someone who appreciated a small kindness in a dark time. "I think I'll just go home," he said softly. "But thank you. You're very kind to offer." "You're the kind one," Victoria blurted out. "I saw you with the little boy. You made his day better while yours was falling apart. That's real class." Keanu looked down at his boots. He seemed almost shy by the compliment. "He's a brave kid," he mumbled. "Take care of yourself, ma'am." "You too, Mr. Reeves." He turned and walked toward the automatic glass doors. They slid open, letting in the cool evening air. He stepped out into the sunset, his silhouette shrinking as he walked toward the parking lot. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, one step after another, carrying his burden with dignity. Victoria stood there for a long time, watching him until he was gone. "Victoria!" her aunt called out, sounding annoyed. "Let's go. I'm hungry." Victoria took a deep breath. She turned away from the window and walked back to her aunt. She helped her aunt walk toward the exit, supporting her weight with a gentle strength she didn't know she had. As they stepped out of the hospital, the city lights were flickering on. The noise of traffic filled the air. It was the same world she had lived in that morning. The same busy, expensive, fast-paced world. But it looked different to her now. She helped her aunt into the car and closed the door gently. She walked around to the driver's side and sat behind the wheel. Before she started the engine, she paused. She looked at her reflection in the rear-view mirror. She saw her makeup, her hair, her expensive clothes. It was all the same. But she knew she wasn't the same. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She had a dozen missed calls and angry texts about work. She selected them all and hit delete. Then she opened her contacts and found the number for the local children's hospital. She made a note to call them in the morning to set up a monthly donation. She started the car. She didn't speed off. She didn't honk at the car in front of her. She drove carefully, slowly, merging into traffic with patience. She thought about the man on the floor, the boy with the 4-pole, and the empty chair. She realized that true richness wasn't about the money in your bank account or the clothes on your back. It was about how much space you made in your heart for others, even when you were hurting. She had learned a lesson from a movie star that no movie could ever teach her. As she drove toward home, the city lights blurring past, Victoria made a silent promise to herself. She would never look at a person on the floor again without asking herself if she was the one who should be sitting there. And she would never take a seat that didn't belong to her. She would stand up instead, and maybe, just maybe, she would make someone else's life a little easier, just like he did. The night was dark. But for the first time in a long time, Victoria didn't feel the need to shine brighter than everyone else. She was just happy to be part of the light.